Schoolchildren around the world have lost close to 2 trillion in-person classroom hours due to COVID. How to educate the pandemic's children? Schools are still closed in 4 out of 9 regions around the world. In parts of the Asia-Pacific, the proportion of classrooms shut increased between February and September, according to UNESCO. The crisis is hitting students who were disadvantaged before the pandemic especially hard.
Hi, I'm Ben Fazulin. Nice to see you again. Schools are reopening in parts of India, but the crisis has highlighted a now even bigger digital divide. Kids in underprivileged communities were unable to join online classes or were pulled out of school altogether. Here's Manira Chowdhury.
Taking school to those who have no access to one. That's what Ritu Singh and a group of volunteers and teachers do every morning. They get on a bus and head to an area where marginalized communities live. The bus is turned into a makeshift classroom for children of migrant laborers, rag pickers and domestic workers. They also serve them lunch.
The children who come to us are those who don't go to school, who have hardly been educated. They come from extremely poor families. We try to give them good education and bring positive changes to their behavior.
The non-profit organization Tejas Asia started this initiative 7 years ago. It calls the fleet Hope Buses because they do just that, bring hope to those with very little.
Since the pandemic struck, a large number of children in the country are struggling to keep up with online education. Furthermore, a recent UNESCO report has revealed that India faces an acute shortage of teachers. In such a situation, it is organizations such as this one which are trying hard to fill that gap in the education system.
9-year-old Mukta is one of those who was on the verge of dropping out of the education system. When the lockdown hit, she and her family went back to her village because her parents had lost their livelihood. Her attempts at attending online classes on her father's phone were rarely successful.
I like to study. That's why I've started coming to these classes on the bus.
Mukta prefers this solution over studying online. But she has no idea when in-person classes will start again for her age group. She says she misses her school.
The number of children who come to us to study has increased. Since schools have been shut for so long, parents are stressed about their children's education. They've started sending them to us, so they don't miss out entirely.
As her day ends, Mukta says she had a great time on the Hope Bus. For many children like her, these buses might just be the only chance they have of learning.
And let me welcome Fernando Rimas, Director of the Global Education Innovation Initiative at Harvard University. Let's start with innovation. Besides these Hope buses, what sort of solutions have impressed you during this crisis?
It is very important to recognize that there have been innovations during the pandemic. And it's important to recognize that for 2 reasons. Number one, because during the pandemic, the normal rules of operation of the education system were suspended, which made it possible to try things we had never tried before. And secondly, because going forward, if we're going to have any hope to recover from this crisis and not see the multiplier effects that a less education generation could cause, it is going to be essential to mobilize that innovation dividend. So I have been working with colleagues, and UNESCO will publish at the end of this month a book that examines 31 innovations around the world through the lens of UNESCO's forthcoming Futures of Education report. And using that as a framework, I looked at 31 innovations around the world, and I will categorize them in the following blocks. First of all, there's been a lot of innovation to foster student-centered learning, personalized learning. They include the use of smartphones in Bangladesh and Pakistan to support literacy and numeracy. They include the use of digital knowledge banks in Egypt and in many other countries that created multimedia platforms that provided students access to resources they could teach. They include multiple programs in India to support home-based learning. They include digital applications for young learners in Indonesia, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Mexico. That's one category of innovation. There is also fewer but also innovations that support deeper learning. This is learning that allows students not just to access knowledge of facts, but to develop procedural knowledge, the skills to act based on understanding of the facts to actually solve new problems. There is another block of innovations, very important, that promotes social-emotional development. One of the things that the pandemic has made visible is that no one learns very much when they're in fear. And that if we are to educate students, we have to educate the mind and the heart. We have to pay attention to social-emotional development. There's been tremendous innovation on that. There's been innovations on teacher and professional development, using technology to help them innovate. There's also been institutional innovations. I just finished a book looking at how universities around the world partnered during the pandemic with education systems for the purpose of supporting innovation. So I won't say that this is a Pollyannish view of the pandemic. I think that the basic story is one of loss and is one of real danger and crisis. But it is important, as you're doing, to try to look for the goodness in the middle of this tragedy with an aim towards rebuilding to building back better.
Fernando, I don't want to be a doubter, but are these innovations going to cost money? Because you've said yourself there's going to be less funding for education, not more, after this crisis.
There is going to be less funding on the public sector because of the unplanned costs that attending to the crisis has generated, and because of the economic recession the pandemic is inducing, is going to reduce the fiscal capacity of governments, for sure. One of the things that has happened during the pandemic is that we've seen many more public-private partnerships. We've seen actors of civil society coming together and understanding that we all have a stake in the future of the education of children. So whether it is families, whether it is corporations, whether it is civil society, we've seen greater mobilization of resources to support education during the pandemic. And going forward, we're going to need that. Yes, these innovations will cost money, but some of these innovations are about changing the way in which we work. Let me give you an example. One of the innovations that I've studied is an innovation in Colombia, a partnership of 11 schools that support high poverty communities, the Alianza Educativa. One of the innovations that they adopted during the pandemic was about how they exchange information, how they communicate. Typically, large organizations have information flows within silos from the bottom to the top, top to the bottom, and then across silos at the very top. And everybody realized during the pandemic that this was extremely inefficient. It was impossible to solve problems in real time unless you broke down those silos and made it possible for people to use technology, such as the one we're using now, to communicate frequently and efficiently. And so as a result of that, that organization realized they could develop synergies. They could develop new products. For example, in a matter of 3 weeks, they mobilized 500 teachers, and they produced an entire curriculum from elementary to high school in radio. I don't know of anyone who can produce an entire school curriculum in 3 weeks. They did that because they were able to use technology to mobilize 500 teachers. The country of Vietnam was able to mobilize all their schools, and in a matter of 1 month, put an entire curriculum on television. Now, I'm not saying that all these innovations have had the same efficacy of the school when it functions ordinarily. They haven't. But the fact that they were able to be done so quickly because people found new ways to work is what I think is key here. We're going to need to move our education systems into becoming learning organizations. And many of them are not learning organizations. So my hope is that the shock induced by the pandemic will impress on leaders of education systems the understanding that if we keep running these bureaucracies the way we used to, we will not be able to face the challenge.
No.
But the question of resources is an important one. The question of resources is crucially important. Societies should make education a priority and should continue to make it a priority.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Fernando Rimes, Harvard University, thank you very much for being on the show. A question now on vaccines and their longevity. Here's our man in front of the bookshelf, Derek Williams.
Why do some vaccines work well for a lifetime, while others are less effective or require boosters?
Some vaccines protect you for life, but many countries are now already recommending boosters for COVID-19 vaccines less than a year after they were launched. Why? Well, there's still a lot that we don't know about things like vaccine durability, because immune memory is a very complex thing. People have unique immune responses to pathogens. And those responses are influenced by factors like age or sex. So blanket statements are tough, but experts say several general factors play roles in vaccine durability. First is how quickly the vaccine's target evolves. Flu vaccines, for instance, have to be updated every year to protect effectively against influenza because it mutates pretty fast. Measles vaccines, on the other hand, protect people for decades. And a big reason why seems to be that the features vaccine-induced antibodies target on the measles virus, that they remain stable. They can't change much. Other reasons for the differences in vaccine durability lie in the immune system, how hefty of an immune response a vaccine causes, for instance. That seems to play a big role. Powerful immune responses appear to be linked to longer immune memory. And the type of vaccine that's used also plays a role. What are called live attenuated vaccines, so ones that are made with pathogens that can still replicate, they generally provide better protection than that provoked by the kinds of newer vaccines that have been authorized for COVID-19. But those newer types of vaccines are also safer in several important ways. Finally, there's the question of how quickly levels of antibodies drop post-vaccination. If a vaccine doesn't provoke a longer-lasting antibody response, the experts say, then the chances are higher that you'll need a booster for it down the road.